Good morning, St. Andrew. It is wonderful to see all of you here this morning. In the words of the late Jesuit writer and priest Henry Nouwen, he says, "You don't think your way into a new kind of living, you live your way into a new kind of thinking." And that's why we gather here every week for worship, to learn how to live in such a way that we see the world differently. We see the way God sees the world, and we love the way God loves the world. Welcome here to St. Andrew, where you don't have to be perfect, but where we are made perfect by the love of God and by the grace that's experienced together in community. If you are searching for a place called home, if you're searching for genuine community and for service that matters, for authentic faith, you've come to the right place and you're among the right people. We here at St. Andrew celebrate that we are a community that celebrates people from all walks of life, families of all shapes and sizes, and people from every point along the spiritual journey. And so we welcome you here to this place of inclusive love and grace and community. Welcome to worship. If you are here for the very first time, we want to encourage you to stop by Cafe Connect on your way out. It's right there in the atrium, just outside the doors of the sanctuary. Some wonderful people there that would love to get to know you, to share a cup of coffee and a donut with you, and to answer any questions that you might have on your next steps here at St. Andrew. I want to encourage all of you to take a moment to register your attendance on the friendship folders that are in the pews and seats among you, or you can go to gostandrew.com/sign-in and make your attendance known that way. We'd love to know that you are here and to keep in touch with you throughout the year about important events and opportunities that we offer here. If you're looking for ways to grow your faith, to serve your neighbors, or to find genuine community, I want to point you to the back pages of your Sunday morning bulletin today. You'll see there on the Connect page and Serve page plenty of opportunities for you to be engaged in meaningful service and to grow your faith and to get to know others. So take advantage of some of those opportunities. I want to invite Reverend Annie to come forward and share a few announcements as we get underway.
Good morning. If you wonder what forces inspired the Italian Renaissance as a Christian revitalization, we have just the class for you. Dr. Albert Hernandez, Associate Professor of the History of Christianity at the Iliff School of Theology, will present a 3-week course on Renaissance wisdom for today's Christian seekers on Thursday evenings beginning February 8th. You can sign up for this class at the Learn kiosk in the atrium. Do you ever wish you could be as interesting as whatever it is that's on your child or grandchild's screen? We have rescheduled Rustin's documentary Screenagers, Growing Up in the Digital Age, for tonight from 6:30 to 8:30 p.m. The documentary addresses the biggest parenting issue of our time. Screenagers reveals how tech time impacts kids' development and offers solutions on how adults can empower kids to best navigate their way through the digital world. God called the people Israel, and God calls us into a future. You will hear St. Andrew clergy today talk about our vision process. Over the last several months, clergy, staff, and congregation members have engaged in a discernment process over where we feel God might be calling our congregation in the next 5 to 10 years. That vision will be shared this afternoon at 12:30 right here in the sanctuary. 3 visionary strategic objectives will be offered as a way to be faithful to God's call. We invite you to join us. If you cannot be here today, we will record it and make it available online. We have a lot to be grateful for, and mostly we're grateful that you're here in worship with us this morning. So take a moment to center your hearts. Please put your cell phones in worship mode, and then please stand and greet one another with the peace of Christ. And now, please remain standing as our acolytes bring in the light of Christ.
at the break of day. Lord, I seek your face, there to hear your voice, feel your love's embrace. Even in the darkness, shines your light so bright. Shines your light so bright. Jesus, now I lay my spirit in your arms to rest.
And now please join me for our call to worship. In the beginning, before time, before the world began, in the here and now, among us, beside us, above us, before us, in the future, when all has found its fulfillment, glory and honor and praise to the Creator, Redeemer, and Sustainer, the God who was, the God who is, the God who will be. You may be seated. The Apostle Paul says, "Do not worry about anything, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. And so by prayer, we bring to God our concerns for ourselves, for others, and for the whole world." O great mystery, fire of life and love, lead us into your presence. Prepare us to wrestle with you in the struggles of our lives. Give us strength to endure. Lead us bravely forward through the place where our paths get dark. Allow us to believe you go with us, even if we must wrestle with you until dawn. Remind us of Jacob wrestling with you until his hip was dislocated. He didn't let go, and he asked for a blessing. You desire to bless us, O God. Remind us to ask for a blessing from you. You are the giver of all life, a constant creator, and you seek our participation. Let us come with faith to wrestle and to hold on until we receive your blessing. We listen. We wait. We continue in our spiritual disciplines until we know you are with us. Lead us now into these moments of silent prayer. And now we join our voices in praying as Jesus taught, saying, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen.
Today's reading is Genesis 32, 22 to 32 from the New Revised Standard Version of the Bible. The same night he got up and took his 2 wives, his 2 maids, and his 11 children, and crossed the ford of the Jabbok. He took them and sent them across the stream, and likewise everything that he had. Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until daybreak. When the man saw that he did not prevail against Jacob, he struck him on the hip socket, and Jacob's hip was put out of joint as he wrestled with him. Then he said, "Let me go, for the day is breaking." But Jacob said, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." So he said to him, "What is your name?" And he said, "Jacob." Then the man said, "You shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with God and with humans and have prevailed." Then Jacob asked him, "Please tell me your name." But he said, "Why is it that you ask me my name?" And there he blessed him. So Jacob called the place Peniel, saying, "For I have seen God face to face, and yet my life is preserved." The sun rose upon him as he passed Peniel, limping because of the hip. Therefore, to this day, the Israelites do not eat the thigh muscle that is on the hip socket, because he struck Jacob on the hip socket at the thigh muscle. May God add a blessing to the reading of his word.
Before I get into my message, I just want to take a moment to share with you. Several months ago, we sat down as we began to put together our budget for 2018, and we talked with the Stewardship Committee, with the Finance Committee, about what we thought would be a good projected number for pledges and for the number of pledges and the amount of pledged income for 2018. And we all agreed that it would be a stretch, but we'd like to set a high mark and a high goal of $2.3 million in pledges, which would be an exceptional stretch for this church. And I'm standing today before you to say we did it. As of this week, we made $2.3 million, and I really couldn't be more proud of you and your commitment and love for this church, and especially for what that commitment means to lives changed and ministries offered to our community. So thank you. It is a great day to celebrate. As we move through our series, we are exploring a few key words that might describe the common experience that we all have as humans with doubt and skepticism. And we've all in this room felt some degree of doubt and skepticism in our relationship with God. And I'll say it is a universal experience, and it should be embraced as a gift. Doubt is like a shaky rope bridge that we all have to take to get from where and what we've always been told we're supposed to believe to that very place of authentic experience in our faith that is real and personal to us. And so far in this series, we have explored this idea of unknowing or uncertainty, which is not a sign that our faith is weak. It's not an indication that we haven't tried hard enough in our relationship with God. Instead, we see uncertainty as absolutely endemic to our faith and a doorway into a deeper relationship of trust and awe and gratitude in our experience and journey with God. Our uncertainty will always leave a little room for God to come to us in surprising and graceful ways. Last week, we asked the question, why is it that Jesus hung out and spent a lot of time with those that the world described as unlovely. And we saw that Jesus did that not just because he loved the unlovely, but because in standing with them, he showed all of the rest of us that we too have unlovely parts of ourselves that are in deep and desperate need of a physician. And Jesus stands with all of us in all of our unloveliness to help transform our pain so that we do not transmit our pain to the world. And today, as we continue in the series, our operative word for the day is unwon. Unwon. And it's a word that speaks, I think, to all those battles in life in which there never really was a clear victory nor an obvious defeat. We've all had many of those moments. We wrestle with God or with life or with circumstance, and before we can get the upper hand, before we can get it all settled and resolved, the fight's just over. And we didn't win, we didn't lose. But when we finally pull ourselves up off the mat, maybe we're a little different. Maybe we gain a new perspective, or we're stronger. Maybe we're no longer stuck where we were. We didn't lose, we didn't win, but we're different. I think we all have a story about an experience in which maybe we were tested and nearly defeated, but from which we emerged stronger. The 16th century mystic St. John of the Cross called those experiences the dark night of the soul. And when he made reference to that concept, it wasn't so much all about the dark night. It was really about the journey of transformation that takes place in the dark night for those who dare to hold on and stay with it. And dark nights, as we all know, come to us in a variety of forms. Broken relationships, a family crisis, a marriage that disintegrates, a child that won't go along with the family program, the loss of a job, the sudden diagnosis that changes everything, the loss and grief of a loved one. Like all of you, I have tossed and turned through my own dark nights over troubles and worries. Every one of us has done that, and in our tossing and turning, we find that we begin to ask daring questions. We doubt, maybe even we despair. Maybe it feels like God is beyond our reach, or that we are just beyond the reach of God. And sometimes in those moments, the odds feel like they're just stacked against us, and we're not sure we're going to come out on the winning end of things. You try simply to hold on long enough to see the light of day. And we have that story of Jacob this morning, which describes precisely that experience that he went through. And to understand the story of Jacob that we heard today, you really have to understand a little bit of the backstory that got him to this place. Jacob is born a fighter. In fact, on the day of his birth, his twin brother Esau, who is the first to be born, as he leaves the womb, there, right behind him, is his brother Jacob, who already has his fist wrapped around the ankle of his baby brother, trying to get there first, trying to trip him up, trying to get the winning prize before his brother does. And so his parents name him Jacob, which means literally heel grabber. And it's an appropriate name for this particular character, Jacob, because that's what he does all of his life. He trips people up. He's willing to trip up anyone in order to get ahead. He's a shyster. He's a schmuck. He's an opportunist without a conscience, which is the worst kind of opportunist. And his problems all begin really when he has that experience of tricking his half-starved brother Esau into trading the family birthright for a bowl of stew. And it continues the day he tricks his half-dead, blind father into giving him the family blessing, the blessing which belongs to the older brother Esau. But Jacob gets there first. He trips up his brother. He trips up his father. He steals the blessing which now cannot be given back to his older brother. And this is Jacob's life. Betraying his brother, bringing disgrace upon his family, this unforgivable deception Jacob has tripped up everyone in his life, and the last words he hears as he leaves the crime scene are the words of his brother Esau, who says to him, "The day our father dies is the day I hunt you down and kill you." And so Jacob runs, and he spends the next 20 years of his life on Uncle Laban's ranch. And he marries two of Laban's daughters, Rachel and Leah. And while he's working for Laban, he begins creatively, deceptively, to systematically steal the sheep of Laban, until one day Laban starts to notice something fishy, and before he can call him out, there again, Jacob packs his bags, his possessions, his family, his new livestock, and he leaves again. More destruction in his wake, more deception. And now it seems like he's emerged and everything is going to be great, except as he scans the horizon, he knows there's something out there. His brother, Esau. And Esau has not forgotten what has happened to him, and he is obsessed with hunting his brother down and exacting revenge by death. And so we have in the story that we read this morning this buildup. This is a moment of truth. It is a day of reckoning that's arrived in Jacob's life. This is where the story picks up. Jacob, the fugitive, sends his entire entourage across the stream, his family, his belongings, his livestock, and he remains behind to spend one night, perhaps his last night on earth, alone. And in that dark night, all alone, he's terrified, guilt-ridden, remorseful, praying that the sun will rise. But during the night, he's ambushed by a power that is greater than him. Maybe it's God. Maybe it's an angel of God. Maybe it's the Kool-Aid man. We don't know really what it is, but Jacob is convinced it's God, and whatever it is, he doesn't see it coming, and it levels him. And suddenly the fight is on. It's a long night of tossing and turning, of punching and bruising, and just when it looks like the fight will never end, his divine opponent thumps him on the thigh, dislocating his hip, which will scar him the rest of his life. He will have a limp forever now. In the ancient Midrash tradition, it says, the rabbis say it wasn't the outside of the hip that the angel hit, it was the inside of the hip, his most vulnerable spot. That's where the angel got him. And yet, in exchange for the injury, Jacob will not let go. He demands a blessing from the opponent. And the stranger gives him the blessing in the form of a new name, Israel. Israel means God wrestler. And suddenly the fight is over. The stranger is gone. And so you ask the question, did Jacob win the battle or lose the battle that night? The stranger got the best of him, but Jacob walked away with a blessing, with a limp and a blessing. The battle was unwon. And yet, as he limped into his future, Jacob was a victor. He had prevailed. Because he had been given a new name. No longer was he Jacob the heel grabber. He was Israel, the God wrestler. Every one of us here is meant to be a God wrestler. Whether we are fugitives running from a broken past or ordinary people just stumbling our way into an uncertain future, every one of us at some point in our lives will have to struggle and wrestle with God if indeed our faith is to become real and honest and authentic. And there, if we dare to struggle and wrestle, I believe we can walk away when the sun rises with at least two very important gifts. And the first gift I want to lift up is the gift of humility. At the heart of this story is the divine opponent's insistence upon remaining anonymous. Jacob, throughout the battle, is demanding to know his opponent's name, but the fact that the opponent never gives it up is absolutely critical to the story. Because In that ancient world, to name something in that world was to exercise control over that something. But the God in this story and the God of our story is mystery, unnamed, uncontrollable. I mean, you think about the original context in which this story was written. The Hebrew people are surrounded by pagan religions, each of whom had special names for their gods. And so when you prayed to those gods, you could manipulate those gods in whatever way you wanted. But this God, the God of Jacob, will not be controlled, will not be contained in an idol, or for that matter, any creed or dogma. I want you to hear this because so many of us, in our own experience, have encountered people who maybe know a little too much about God, who come off with all the answers to questions that haven't yet been asked, who insist that you have to believe this or reject that in order to be a Christian. And here's a story that says God is mystery. God can't be confined or pinned down or restricted by any human religion, not even the Christian religion. And it can't be confined by any of our paraphernalia of religion, like creeds or doctrines. This God that we believe in is a living, free, unpredictable, mysterious, and surprising God. I think this is why Jesus once described God or the divine presence, the Son of Man, as often coming to us like a thief in the night. This God intrudes upon our presumptions, intrudes in our lives when we least expect it, in those places where we feel most certain and settled. And in that intrusion, God gives us a whole new way of seeing ourselves. Several years ago, I was attending a clergy conference in Atlanta with my best friend and a colleague of mine. And it was a week-long conference, and so we split the cost of the hotel room, shared the room, and on the first night of our stay, an actual thief visited us in our room. It had been a long day of travel and then meetings in the evening. We were so exhausted that we neglected to set that swinging security lock on the door. And it was then at around 3 a.m. that our intruder quietly broke in. He switched on the bathroom lights so that he could navigate the dark room without waking us up, which, I mean, you have to say was super thoughtful of him. Upon locating my wallet, he emptied the contents, took the cash. He left the wallet exactly where he found it, again, super considerate. And at some point during the heist, my friend woke up and locked eyes on our thief. And that was then that the thief politely walked himself to the door, and on his way out, again, considerately turned off the bathroom light and just walked out the door and closed the door gently. And I slept through the entire ordeal, which I have to say is I mean, if you're going to get robbed, this is the way to go. I felt like that character in the movie L.A. Story, Steve Martin, as he's at the ATM, and he turns around, and there a stranger is there, and who says, "Hi, my name is Bob, and I'll be your mugger today." I mean, it was that great. I mean, in retrospect, my experience of getting robbed couldn't have gone any better. But it didn't feel so good at the time. In fact, it was profoundly humbling and unsettling. To be startled awake at 3 a.m. with news of an intruder, blinded by the light, frantically looking for your wallet and for your contents, and your heart is racing, and there's still something like ghostly in the room that says somebody was just here. And when you come to your senses, it dawns on you that in that moment you were utterly vulnerable, that your fate was out of your hands. And you wonder what's worse, that the intruder stole your cash, or that he robbed you of your precious presumption that you are invulnerable, that you are in control, that you are strong and invincible. In the dark night, God intrudes upon our assumptions and presumptions and unsettles our certainties. This is how it happened for Jacob. He thought that he could just get through life doing what he'd always done. Grab a heel, trip somebody up, fleece whoever is next, and run. And then God intrudes upon his life and thumps him. And he gains a new perspective. There's one other gift from the God wrestling dark nights of our lives. It's the gift of peace for our restless soul. Jacob's story is about a restless spirit that finally stops running. He stops running from his broken past, from the regrets and guilt that plague his conscience, from the duplicity and deceptive ways that rule his life. Jacob is a spiritual fugitive. He's empty and exhausted, but he can't stop running. He doesn't know what he really wants in life, and so he takes whatever he can get his hands on. He doesn't know how to ask for what he really wants in his life, and so he lies and cheats his way through to get it. He is the original prodigal son story. He breaks his father's heart. He takes what belongs to his brother, and then he runs. He runs from the damage that he's created in his life and his family, but he never finds the peace that he longs for until that dark night at the river. And on that night, he encounters a power greater than himself. And he doesn't beat it, and it doesn't beat him, but he surrenders. It was a Thanksgiving day. I was 12 years old. Our extended family had just sat down at the dinner table, which was a mixture of Catholics and Lutherans all at one table, which was like playing with a stick of dynamite sometimes. And as we sat down to eat, the phone rang. It was an otherwise peaceful night until the phone rang that night. And then all commotion and chaos was unleashed. On the other end of that phone was my grandfather, whom I had never met. And I had only seen growing up Polaroids of my grandfather, and mostly I heard the very sad stories of his life. He was not a part of our family. What I knew about my grandfather was that he was an alcoholic. And before running away for 10 years, he had spent the better part of his life tearing his family apart. And as many of us in this room can identify, his absence from the family made it possible for there to be peace in the family. And on that night, as he called, he asked if he could come home, if he could be a part of the family again. He asked if he could be forgiven and to start over. He simply just woke up one day and discovered that he had lost everything in his life and every person he ever loved. And after 50 years of drinking and 10 years of running away, he just got tired. And he came home. When the dust finally settled, he did come home. He stopped drinking. He stopped running. And he found peace. And it was a month later, we as Catholics attending the midnight mass at the Catholic Church, when we accompanied my grandfather to the altar where the priest poured water on his head and baptized him and welcomed him back in to the family. He was, as I think of him now so many years later, he was a God wrestler. Imperfect, flawed, walked with his own spiritual limp, but he was a God wrestler. He had striven with God and with life, with the wounds of war, with addiction, with his own grief, and in the end he prevailed. In most of the hard battles that we face, we neither win nor lose. So much of life is unwon. We hold on for dear life. We pray that we will make it through the night, that the sun will rise. And if we hang in there, and if we hold on, when the sun rises, there will be two gifts for us. A gift of humility, which brings with it a new perspective, and the gift of rest and peace for our restless souls. Amen.
And now please stand and join with me in our affirmation of faith. We believe in God, robed in splendor, veiled in mystery, ruler of darkness and light. We encounter God in Jesus Christ, who was tested and put to death, but whose radiance could not be quenched, whose resurrected life revives the weary and heals the wounded. We walk with God, guided by the light of God's Spirit, which leads us into truth and life. We watch and wait for God and for the fulfillment of God's promises, when the darkness will hold no fear and the light will show the way. All creation will be restored and God's peace will reign forever. You may be seated.
Good morning. I'm Andy Dunning. I'm one of the pastors here at St. Andrew, and it is a privilege and an honor for me this morning to share with you the presentation of the Dale Wood Service Award for our men's ministry. A number of years ago, a man named Dale Wood, who was part of us here at St. Andrew, led our congregation in resurrecting and growing a men's ministry. The strength of our men's ministry today is partly because of Dale's work, but it's also in large part because of the committed men who came on board with him, believing that men's ministry could and should play an important role in the life of our church. The Dale Wood Service Award is given each year to a man who exemplifies the values of supporting spiritual growth and leading men to mature as disciples through participation in the life of the church. And so I'm joined here this morning by Tom Casera, who is the president of men's ministry, by James Lingle, who is last year's Dale Wood Service Award honoree, as well as by Mark Phillips, who's receiving this year's award. Here at St. Andrew, the men's ministry offers a wide variety of opportunities to serve and to be involved. We have men's covenant groups. These are small groups who meet regularly to focus on spiritual life. Our Helping Hands ministry is a large group of men and several women who gather weekly to clean and maintain our church building. Our men's grill team cooks for church events and for events at the nonprofit agencies with whom we partner to serve our community. The men's leadership team organizes and plans men's ministry here at St. Andrew, and the third Saturday of each month is a breakfast gathering for all the men of the church and any friends who they'd like to invite and bring along. Mark Phillips has been instrumental in all of these ministries. He's been part of St. Andrew for 26 years. He was one of the early supporters of Dale Wood's push to resurrect the men's ministry here, and for 10 years he's been part of the men's leadership team. He's chaired men's ministries, he's helped initiate a men's covenant group, he's led the men's grill team, he's served in the wider church as well by chairing our staff parish relations committee and our finance committee. He's also served in Rainbows, which was the previous version of what we now call Good Grief, our ministry to children who are going through grief and loss. Mark has been a youth leader and Sunday school youth teacher as well, and I got to know him a little bit before I even came to St. Andrew because he was working with our men's group to put together a golf tournament that benefited Denver Urban Ministries, which is the nonprofit where I worked before I came here on staff. Since I've been here at St. Andrew, I've come to know Mark as a God wrestler in the finest sense, a wise and calm leader who is always willing to listen to others, who consistently maintains both his spiritual life and his sense of humor. So I am delighted and I am honored to present this year's Dale Wood Service Award to Mark Phillips, and I hope you'll join me in thanking him for his service.
This is an exciting church in which to work, serve, learn, and play, as you just experienced right there with the passing of that service award. Today we celebrate the 1,000 plus volunteers who make this church the vibrant community it is. On Sunday mornings, it is volunteers who greet you, who make coffee, who serve as ushers and safety team members. Volunteers teach, prepare communion, sing in the choir, and teach the children and youth. The volunteers who make our Sunday mornings run smoothly are both visible and behind the scenes, sharing their gifts with us as a congregation. This morning, we would like to honor all of our volunteers. If you are a Sunday volunteer in any capacity, would you please stand at this time? Don't be shy. Just stand up where you are. Now, please remain standing. Don't be sitting down yet. Remain standing throughout. I'm going to ask some other people to stand as well. If you serve during the week on a committee, in a ministry area of any kind, with our facilities or administratively, would you please stand and remain standing? And if you volunteer at St. Andrew at any time throughout the year, would you please join them and stand with us now? We are grateful for your ministry with us, and we are thankful for your faithful witness through your service. You may be seated. It is this generosity of spirit that allows St. Andrew to be the hands and feet of Christ throughout the year. We prepare now our hearts as we offer our blessings back to God for these works of community and grace.
In gratitude we come to give our thanks to you for autumn leaves, cooling breeze, refreshing showers too. In gratitude we come to give our thanks to you for winter snow and flowers that grow. Our gratitude is due. The sun that shines by day, the moon by night, reminds us of your care, reminds us of your might. The rainbow in the rain gives us hope anew. In gratitude we come to give our thanks to you, to you. In gratitude we come to give our thanks to you for morning prayer, for fresh air, majestic mountain views. In gratitude we come to give our thanks to you for stars at night and twinkling lights, in silence praising you, in silence praising you. Amen. Amen. Amen.
God of every good and perfect gift, help us to live and give in your kingdom of perfect love, where grace is the ground beneath our feet and kindness is the air we breathe. Amen. You guys can.
When God restored our common life, our hope, our liberty. At first it seemed a passing dream, a waking fantasy. A shock of joy swept over us, for we had wept so long. The seas we watered once with tears sprang up into a song.
Please join me now for our benediction. We go now to bless the world, to sustain the weary with a word of hope, to draw neighbors and strangers into the refuge of grace, to bear the love of Christ in every place, at all times, for all God's people. Amen.